I never thought a single mistake would change the way my entire family looked at me. It started on a quiet evening, one of those nights where the walls of the house feel heavier than usual, like they know the weight of secrets hidden inside them. I was sitting in my room, trying to disappear into my phone, when my sister barged in without knocking. She was furious, because I had borrowed her charger without asking. It wasn't the first time she yelled at me, but this time her voice carried downstairs to where my parents were. Within minutes, my dad stormed up, angry and tired from work, and all his frustration boiled over. He accused me of being irresponsible, selfish, and a burden. I remember standing there, frozen, my throat dry, wanting to explain that I just wanted to be left alone. But then my sister, almost like she wanted to ruin me, smirked and said, "Maybe we should teach him a lesson. He thinks he can just take whatever he wants." I didn't know then that this joke, this offhand comment, would start something I could never go back from. My mother sighed and said in that cold tone she used when she was done with me, "Fine. He wants to act like a child. We'll treat him like one. Put him in your clothes for the evening. See if he likes being embarrassed." I laughed nervously, thinking it was an empty threat, but my sister's eyes lit up with a spark of mischief and something darker. She grabbed my wrist and dragged me into her room, ignoring my weak protests. I remember the sharp scent of her perfume filling the air, the messy piles of clothes on the floor, and the closet door creaking open like it was a trap. She tossed a soft pink sweater and a pleated skirt onto the bed, along with a pair of white knee socks. My face burned red. "No way," I muttered, but she crossed her arms and said, "You heard Mom. Either you do this, or I'll tell them you refused, and we'll make it worse." My heart pounded in my chest. It felt humiliating, unfair, wrong, but something deep inside me stirred, a tiny whisper I tried to ignore. My hands trembled as I slowly picked up the clothes. The sweater felt impossibly soft. I kept telling myself this was a punishment, that I had no choice. When I put on the skirt and sweater, my sister laughed and pulled me to the mirror. My reflection was jarring. I saw a boy who didn't belong in those clothes, red-faced, eyes darting away from his own image. But then I noticed how comfortable it felt. My legs were bare but warm under the soft fabric, and the sweater hugged me in a way my own clothes never did. I hated that I liked it. My sister wasn't satisfied yet. She brushed out my hair, applied a light coat of mascara, and dabbed some lip gloss on me. I felt my heart skip. The boy in the mirror looked softer, almost like someone else entirely. When I walked downstairs, my parents smirked, my dad shaking his head. "Maybe this will teach you some respect," he muttered. They all laughed a little, but I stayed silent, my face hot. I thought I'd be crushed by shame, but instead, as I sat there on the couch, pretending to be miserable, I felt something I couldn't explain. I felt free. For the first time in my life, the tension in my chest loosened. It was like wearing those clothes gave me permission to stop pretending to be someone I wasn't. That night, I lay in bed in my own pajamas again, but I couldn't stop thinking about how it felt. My family thought they had punished me, but they had accidentally unlocked a part of me I didn't even know was trapped. Over the next few days, I couldn't focus on anything. I kept replaying the image of myself in the mirror, this strange mix of shame and comfort. I started sneaking into my sister's room when no one was home, just to touch the clothes, sometimes slipping into them for a few minutes before guiltily changing back. One afternoon, I was caught. My sister opened her bedroom door and froze. I was sitting on the edge of her bed, wearing one of her summer dresses, staring at the floor. For a second, we just stared at each other. Her face shifted from shock to anger to something unreadable. She didn't scream. She just said, "Mom needs to see this." My whole body went cold. I begged her not to, tears in my eyes, but she dragged me downstairs. My mother stared at me, silent, then asked my sister to leave the room. What she said next will never leave me. She sat me down and whispered, "I knew this would happen one day." I was confused and terrified. Then she told me about her brother, my uncle, who had always struggled with himself, who moved far away and never visited. She said he used to hide in her closet when they were kids, wearing her dresses. My dad never forgave him, when he found out. My mother's eyes were full of some heavy sadness. She hugged me, and for a moment I thought I was safe. But when Dad came home, everything shattered. He screamed at me, called me disgusting, said I was humiliating the family. He didn't care about my tears. That night, I heard my parents arguing. My mother tried to defend me, saying it was just a phase. But Dad said he wouldn't have another freak in his house. I lay in bed, shaking, feeling like my very existence was a crime. The next morning, I found a trash bag in my room. Inside were my sister's old clothes, skirts, blouses, dresses. My mom whispered, "Keep them hidden. I don't want your father to know I gave you these." From then on, I lived two lives. By day, I was the quiet, awkward son my father barely looked at. By night, in the safety of my locked room, I became someone I didn't have words for yet. I felt whole, free, and yet terrified every time I heard footsteps outside my door. I hated the guilt, the fear, the knowledge that if anyone found out, I might lose the little family I had. Months passed like this, and the secret grew heavier. One night, my dad came home early. I didn't hear him. I was standing in front of my mirror in a floral dress, lost in thought, when the door burst open. His face twisted in rage and betrayal. He didn't say a word. He just grabbed my arm, yanked me toward the closet, and started tearing the clothes down. He threw them into a pile and stormed out with the bag. I sat on the floor, shaking, my skin burning with shame and fear. I never saw those clothes again. My dad never spoke to me directly after that. My mother avoided my eyes. My sister looked guilty, but she said nothing. It felt like I had died, and a ghost was living in my place. And yet deep inside, the part of me they tried to erase still whispered. Because no matter how much they wanted me to be ashamed, in that quiet, secret space in my heart, I remembered how it felt to be free. I don't know if I'll ever escape that house, or if I'll ever find the courage to live as the person I saw in the mirror. But I do know this. What they thought was a punishment showed me the truth. And even if I can't say it out loud, I can never unsee who I really am. After that night, something inside me shifted. I woke up the next morning to the sound of my father moving around the house, his heavy footsteps shaking the walls, but I didn't dare get out of bed. My chest felt hollow, like a part of me had been ripped away along with the trash bag he had taken. My mother came to my room quietly, set a plate of breakfast on the table, and said, "Eat something," without looking at me. I stared at the eggs until they got cold. School that day was a blur. I didn't speak to anyone. I didn't even hear the teachers. All I could think about was that my secret wasn't just mine anymore, and the person I felt inside, the one who had started to feel alive, was buried again. But something else lingered too. Anger. Not just at my father for shaming me, but at myself for feeling so helpless. I hated that I still wanted those clothes, that soft feeling of belonging, even after everything. Weeks went by in silence. My dad barely spoke to me. My sister avoided me except for the occasional guilty glance. And my mom, she tried to pretend nothing had happened, but her eyes told me she was scared. One night, I overheard my parents arguing again through the thin walls. My dad said he wouldn't tolerate this behavior, that he refused to raise a son like that. My mom said, "You can't change who he is by yelling," and there was a long silence before I heard something break, maybe a plate or a glass. My heart pounded as I pressed my ear to the wall, trying to understand what my future would look like if this secret ever truly came to light. I started spending more time alone, avoiding everyone. And then one rainy afternoon, while my parents were out, my sister came into my room holding a small box. She sat on the floor and said softly, "I kept one thing for you." I opened the box, and inside was a pale blue scarf I had worn once, wrapped neatly, almost lovingly. I stared at it, my throat tight. "Why?" I whispered. She shrugged. "Because I don't think you're a freak. I think you're just you." Those words made something break inside me. I started crying, and she hugged me like she used to when we were younger, before all the tension. That night, for the first time in weeks, I wrapped the scarf around my shoulders and looked in the mirror. It was nothing like the full outfit I used to wear, but even that small piece made my heart flutter. I realized then that freedom didn't always have to be loud or obvious. Sometimes it was as simple as a scarf, a moment of stillness, a breath of self-acceptance. But my dad wasn't done with me. One evening, he came home early again. I was in my room, doing homework, when he knocked and then entered without waiting. He sat on my bed, staring at me with a strange calm I didn't trust. "I grew up with a brother," he said, his voice low. "He did the same things you're doing. He wore my mother's clothes. He ran away when he was 17. We never saw him again. My father said he was dead to us." He paused, and for a second I thought I saw something like pain in his eyes. Then it was gone. "I won't let that happen again. You're my son, and you will act like it." I nodded, but inside, I felt like I was breaking apart. He didn't understand that this wasn't about acting like anything. This was about being. And he was asking me to erase myself. The months that followed were quiet but suffocating. My dad watched me constantly, like he was waiting for me to slip. My mom tried to keep the peace, and my sister, she became my silent ally, sneaking me little things, a bracelet, a ribbon, small tokens that reminded me I wasn't completely alone. But the weight of the secret grew heavier. I started writing in a journal late at night, pouring my thoughts into the pages. The shame, the fear, the tiny sparks of joy I clung to in private. One night, I made a mistake. I fell asleep with the journal open on my bed. The next morning it was gone. I knew instantly my father had found it. My chest went cold. I searched the house in panic, but it was nowhere. When he came home that evening, he didn't say a word. He just looked at me like I was already gone. I didn't know then that this was the moment everything would change again. The silence after my journal disappeared was louder than any screaming could have been. I could feel it in my chest, pressing down like a weight I couldn't shake off. My father didn't confront me that night, but his eyes followed me every time I moved through the house. My mother's hands trembled when she set the table for dinner, and my sister didn't say a word. I couldn't eat. I felt like the air in the room was poisoned with all the words we weren't saying. The next morning, I woke up to a folded piece of paper on my desk. It was my father's handwriting, sharp and heavy, every letter carved like it was meant to cut me. It said, "You are not my daughter. Remember that." My stomach twisted. He didn't yell, he didn't hit me, this was worse. He was telling me that he saw me as something I wasn't supposed to be, that he would never accept the part of me I was only beginning to understand. I wanted to rip the paper apart, but I couldn't. I hid it in a shoebox under my bed, along with the blue scarf and the little ribbon my sister had given me. That box became the only place where I felt like I still existed. Weeks passed like a slow bleed. I went to school, came home, locked myself in my room, and tried to disappear. I avoided mirrors because they reminded me of the freedom I had lost. I avoided my dad because I was scared of what I might see in his face. And yet, deep down, that part of me, the one they tried to erase, was still there waiting. I would catch myself staring at my sister's closet door or at the reflection in a dark window, imagining who I could be if I wasn't trapped in this house, in this skin of expectation. Then one evening, everything shifted again. My mom knocked softly on my door and came in with a small cardboard box. She set it on my bed and whispered, "Your uncle, he sent this to me years ago. I didn't know if I should give it to you, but I think he would want you to have it." I hesitated before opening it. Inside were old photographs, my mom as a teenager with a young man who looked eerily like me. But in some of the photos, he was wearing dresses, his hair grown longer, smiling like he was alive in a way I wasn't. There was also a letter, the paper yellowed and folded carefully. My hands shook as I opened it. It was from my uncle. He wrote about how he had run away because he couldn't be himself at home. He wrote about the pain of hiding, of living in fear, and the loneliness of starting over. He said he hoped one day someone else in the family would understand him, that maybe they could live free in a way he couldn't. My throat tightened as I read his words. I felt like he was speaking directly to me, reaching across time to tell me I wasn't broken. I asked my mom, barely able to speak, "Does Dad know you have this?" She shook her head. If he did, he'd burn it. That night, I stared at those photos for hours. I traced my uncle's smile with my fingers and wondered if I would ever get to smile like that. But even as hope flickered, fear stayed close. If my father knew I had this box, I didn't know what he would do. It wasn't long before he found out anyway. One Saturday afternoon, I made the mistake of leaving the box out on my bed while I went to the bathroom. When I came back, my father was sitting in my chair, the box in his lap, his face stone cold. He held up a photo of my uncle in a sundress and stared at me. "Is this what you want?" he asked, his voice low and dangerous. I couldn't answer. My hands were shaking. "Do you want to end up like him? Alone? A disgrace?" His voice rose with every word until he was shouting. My mother ran in, trying to calm him, but he pushed past her and stormed out, slamming the door so hard the frame shook. That night, he didn't come home. My mom cried at the kitchen table, and my sister and I sat in silence. I didn't know if he would leave us, or if he would come back angrier than ever. I barely slept. The next morning, I found another note on my desk. This one said, "If you want to live like that, don't live here." I held the note in my hands until it crumpled. Something in me broke and healed at the same time. I realized that I couldn't keep living in the shadows of this house, waiting for permission to exist. I didn't know where I would go or who I would become, but I knew I couldn't keep pretending. I packed a small bag with a few clothes, the scarf, the ribbon, and my uncle's photos. I didn't even know if I had the courage to leave, but I needed to feel the weight of the choice in my hands. My sister hugged me tight and whispered, "I'll cover for you." As I stood at the front door that night, my heart pounding, I felt more afraid than I ever had. But under the fear was something else. A spark. The same spark I had felt the first time I looked in the mirror in that soft pink sweater. The spark of freedom. They thought it was a punishment. Maybe in a way it had been. But it also set me free. The night I stepped out of that house, the air felt different, sharper and colder, like it was testing me. I stood at the edge of the street with my small bag in hand, my heart pounding so hard I could hear it in my ears. The streetlights cast long shadows, and the world felt both terrifying and alive. I had no plan, no destination, just the desperate need to breathe without fear of someone tearing me apart for who I was. I walked for hours, past houses with warm lights glowing in the windows, families laughing over dinners I would never sit at again. The weight of loneliness pressed in, but under it was that spark, that quiet voice whispering, "You're free now." I found a park and sat on a bench, pulling the blue scarf from my bag and wrapping it around my neck. It was a small comfort in the dark, a piece of myself I refused to let go of. By dawn, I was exhausted, cold, and hungry. I wandered into a small gas station and bought a coffee with a few crumpled bills I had in my pocket. The cashier, a middle-aged woman with kind eyes, looked at me like she could sense something was wrong. She didn't ask questions, and I was grateful for that. I sat outside on the curb, sipping the bitter coffee, thinking about my uncle and wondering if this was what he felt the first night he left home, alone, scared, but unwilling to go back. For the next few days, I drifted. I slept in parks, in a bus station once, clutching my bag like it was the only thing keeping me alive. I started wearing the scarf more openly, sometimes even tying the ribbon in my hair. Small steps, but each one felt like reclaiming a piece of a self I had been forced to hide. The freedom was real, but so was the fear. Every time I saw a police car, I worried they would stop me and call my father. Then, one rainy afternoon, I stumbled into a small thrift shop to escape the weather. The smell of old fabric and dust filled the air. The woman behind the counter, with gray hair and a soft voice, smiled at me. "Looking for something?" she asked. I hesitated before nodding. "Just looking." I wandered the aisles, running my fingers over the clothes. Dresses, skirts, soft sweaters, pieces of freedom hanging silently on metal racks. My heart ached. I didn't have the money for much, but when I reached the back, I found a faded yellow cardigan. It was simple, worn, but when I slipped it on, I felt warm in a way I hadn't in months. I bought it with the last of my cash. That night, I slept in the bus station again, wearing the cardigan under my jacket. I dreamed of my uncle, standing in a field, smiling at me like he was proud. When I woke up, something inside me had shifted. I realized I couldn't keep drifting forever. I needed to find out what happened to him. I started searching libraries and public computers for any trace of him. Days turned into weeks. I learned he had changed his name years ago, but eventually, I found a small social media account with a photo that looked like him. Older now, hair longer, smiling with friends I didn't know. He lived only 2 towns away. My hands shook as I stared at the screen, torn between hope and terror. I saved the address from a tag location and took a bus there the next morning. My heart was in my throat the entire ride. When I arrived, I walked down a quiet street until I found the small house from the photo. My legs felt like they might give out, but I forced myself to knock. The door opened, and there he was. Older, softer, but unmistakably my uncle. For a long moment, he just stared at me, and then his eyes filled with tears. "You're her son," he whispered. I nodded, my own throat tight. He pulled me into a hug that felt like coming home to a place I'd never been. For the first time, I felt safe enough to cry. Inside his house, the walls were lined with photos of him smiling, living, surviving. He listened to my story without judgment, just quiet understanding. He told me about leaving, about the pain and the freedom, about the family secrets that went deeper than I knew. My father, he said, had always hated himself for the way he treated him. The anger he carried wasn't just at me, it was at the ghost of his own brother. The mirror he couldn't bear to face. Hearing that made my chest ache. Part of me still wanted my father to accept me, to see me, but part of me finally understood that his love might never come. My uncle said I could stay with him as long as I needed. That night, I slept in a real bed for the first time in weeks, wrapped in a blanket that smelled like lavender. And when I woke up for a brief moment, I felt free, not just in secret, not just in hiding, but fully, wholly free. But freedom, I would soon learn, always comes with a price. The first few weeks living with my uncle felt like stepping into a new world, one I had only dreamed about while staring at my bedroom ceiling back home. His house was quiet, warm, and full of small details that made me feel safe. The soft hum of a fan at night, the faint smell of coffee in the mornings, and the way sunlight filtered through lace curtains. He didn't push me to talk, but he was always there if I wanted to. It was the first time I'd ever felt like I could exist without hiding. During the day, I helped him around the house, folding laundry, watering plants, cooking simple meals. In the evenings, we sat in the living room while he told me stories about his life, the years of running, the people who had hurt him, and the people who had saved him. He told me about the first time he looked in the mirror and saw himself fully, without fear, and how he knew he could never go back. I started to explore that feeling myself. He lent me some of his clothes, long, soft cardigans, flowing shirts, even a skirt I was terrified but thrilled to try on. We would sit together as he taught me small things, like how to style my hair, how to choose colors that felt right. The first time I looked in the mirror in his bedroom, wearing a soft blue dress he had picked for me, my breath caught in my throat. For the first time, the reflection didn't feel like a stranger or a joke. It felt like me. But even in this quiet freedom, a shadow lingered. I kept thinking about my family, especially my father. I imagined him sitting at the dinner table in silence, my sister avoiding his gaze, my mother trying to hold the house together while pretending I didn't exist. Part of me hated him for what he did to me. Another part of me, the part that still felt like a child seeking approval, wondered if he missed me at all. Then one evening the phone rang. My uncle handed it to me with a cautious look. It was my mother. Her voice was tight, shaking. "Where are you?" she whispered. I hesitated, glancing at my uncle, who nodded slowly. "I'm safe," I said. There was a long pause before she said, "Your father knows. He's angry, but he wants to see you." My stomach twisted. I didn't know if it was fear or hope. My uncle leaned forward and whispered, "Only if you want to." I agreed to meet him in a public place, a small diner in the town near my uncle's house. My hands were shaking the entire time I waited, my uncle sitting in the corner to keep an eye on me from a distance. When my father finally walked in, he looked older than I remembered. His face was hard, but there was something underneath it I couldn't read. He sat across from me, his hands clasped so tightly his knuckles were white. For a long moment he didn't speak. Then he said, "You look different." His voice cracked on the last word. I swallowed hard and whispered, "This is who I am."
His jaw tightened.
"I don't understand it. I don't like it." But he paused, staring at the table. "I can't stop thinking about my brother. About how I lost him. I don't want to lose you too." Tears stung my eyes. I didn't know if I could trust his words, but hearing them cracked something open in me. We sat in that diner for an hour, talking quietly, cautiously. He didn't say he accepted me. He didn't say he understood. But he said he would try. And for now, that was enough to keep a small flame of hope alive. When I went back to my uncle's house that night, I cried into the yellow cardigan I had bought from the thrift store. Not because everything was fixed, far from it, but because for the first time, I felt like maybe, just maybe, the person I was and the family I came from didn't have to destroy each other completely. I knew the road ahead would be long, full of fear and doubt, and maybe even more pain. But as I stood in front of the mirror that night, wrapped in my scarf and cardigan, I smiled through the tears. Because no matter what anyone said, no matter how many times they tried to punish me for being myself, I had finally found a way to feel free. A few weeks after that meeting at the diner, the fragile hope I had started to build was tested in a way I never expected. My life at my uncle's house had begun to feel like a new rhythm: quiet mornings with tea, long talks at night, and days spent slowly discovering the parts of myself I had hidden for so long. But in the back of my mind, I knew the story with my family wasn't finished. One evening, I came home to find my uncle sitting at the kitchen table with a letter in his hands, his face pale. He slid it toward me without a word. My heart dropped when I saw the handwriting. It was my father's. I opened it slowly, my hands trembling. The letter was short. "I can't carry this secret anymore. If you want to know the truth about our family, ask your mother about the night your uncle left. I can't forgive myself. I can't forgive her. But maybe you should know." The words rattled in my head like broken glass. My uncle's eyes were full of worry, but he said, "You deserve to know. Secrets destroy us if we let them." That night, I called my mother. She answered on the first ring. Her voice was brittle, like she had been waiting for this moment. When I told her about the letter, there was a long silence on the line before she whispered, "I never wanted you to find out this way." Piece by piece, she told me the truth. The night my uncle left all those years ago, it wasn't because he ran away in shame. He had begged my parents to let him stay, to accept him as he was. My father had thrown him out into the cold. My mother had done nothing. She had let it happen. My uncle had knocked on her window that night, crying, asking for help, and she had turned off the light and walked away. As she spoke, my chest tightened. I imagined my uncle, alone and shivering, and my mother hiding in the dark. And I understood the weight in her eyes, the guilt she had carried all these years. "I thought I was protecting the family," she said, her voice breaking. "But I destroyed it instead." I couldn't speak. My hands were cold, my throat dry. When I finally managed to whisper, "Why are you telling me this now?" she said, "Because you deserve the truth. And because I can't let the same thing happen again." When I hung up, I sat in silence for a long time, staring at the letter, the phone, the small kitchen with its warm light and faint smell of tea. My uncle placed a hand on my shoulder. "You can choose a different ending," he said softly. "You don't have to carry their shame anymore." That night, I went for a walk under the streetlights, the yellow cardigan wrapped around me, the blue scarf trailing in the breeze. For the first time in my life, I felt the weight of my family's history, not as a chain, but as a story I could step out of. I thought about my father, my mother, my sister, and the boy I used to be, locked in that bedroom, terrified of being seen. I whispered to the night, "I am not your punishment. I am free." When I returned home, my uncle was waiting. He didn't need to ask what I had decided. He saw it in my face. From that day on, I began to live fully as myself. Not without fear, not without grief, but without the cage I had carried for so long. The family's secrets still linger in the shadows, and I don't know if my father will ever truly forgive himself, or me. But I know this. The freedom they tried to punish me with was the truth I had been searching for all my life. And I will never give it back. They thought it was a punishment, but I felt free. From the night I whispered those words into the quiet street, I am not your punishment. I am free. Life began to move in a way I had never felt before. It wasn't fast, and it wasn't easy, but it was mine. My uncle and I started to build a fragile little world together, one where I could exist without constantly flinching from shadows. He taught me how to sew small tears in clothes, how to cook meals we'd share at the little kitchen table, and how to take up space without apologizing for it. But even in this freedom, I couldn't shake the ghosts of my family. Some nights, I woke up from dreams where I was back in my childhood bedroom, the door bursting open, my father's voice roaring, calling me a disgrace. I would lie there in the dark, clutching the blue scarf like a lifeline, until my heartbeat slowed. My uncle would sometimes hear me, and just knock softly, leaving a glass of water by my door. He understood in ways no one else could. One gray morning, a letter arrived in the mail addressed to me in my mother's handwriting. My hands shook as I opened it. Inside were three things: a short note, a small silver locket, and a folded photo. The note said only, "I'm sorry I didn't protect you. I hope this helps you remember who you are." The locket was my grandmother's, worn and cool in my palm. And the photo made my chest ache. It was me as a small child, maybe 4 years old, twirling in my mother's oversized scarf, laughing, while my sister clapped in the background. I didn't even remember that day, but she had kept that moment all these years. It was like she was saying, "I saw you before anyone else did." I started visiting the library more often, reading stories about people like me, learning words for the feelings I had carried in silence for so long. Some nights, I sat with my uncle and shared the stories, and he would nod and say, "I wish I had this when I was your age." There was a bittersweet comfort in knowing I wasn't alone anymore, that there was a history to people like us, a thread of survival woven through time. Then, one rainy evening, my phone buzzed with a message I never expected.
It was from my sister.
"Can I see you?" We met in a quiet cafe, and when she walked in, I barely recognized her. She looked older, not in her face but in her eyes, like the house we grew up in had drained her in the months since I left. We sat across from each other, and for a moment, neither of us spoke. Then she reached into her bag and pulled out a small bundle. "These are yours," she said softly. I opened the bundle and found some of the clothes my father had thrown out months ago. My sister had secretly saved them. The pink sweater, the white knee socks, the soft floral dress. My throat tightened as I touched the fabric. It felt like holding pieces of myself I thought were lost forever. She reached across the table and grabbed my hand. "I'm sorry," she whispered. "I shouldn't have laughed that first night. I thought it was funny. I didn't know it would change everything." I squeezed her hand. "I didn't know either." We sat there for hours, talking in low voices. She told me about the tension at home, how my father rarely spoke, and how my mother seemed like a ghost moving through the house. She told me that sometimes she heard my dad in his room, talking to himself, saying he had lost 2 sons. I didn't know what to say to that, so I just listened. Before we left, she hugged me tightly, like she didn't want to let go. For the first time in my life, I felt like I wasn't completely cut off from my family. There was a thread, fragile but real, that still connected us. Life with my uncle slowly became more stable. I found a small part-time job at a secondhand bookstore, a place that smelled of paper and ink and safety. The owner, an older woman with round glasses, didn't ask questions when I came in wearing the yellow cardigan or the blue scarf. She just smiled and said, "You belong here." I spent hours organizing shelves, reading in quiet corners, and meeting people who didn't look at me like I was wrong for existing. One evening, while I was closing up the shop, my uncle walked in with an envelope. He looked nervous, almost excited. "Your mother sent this," he said. Inside was another letter, longer this time. She wrote about my father, how he had started seeing a therapist after our meeting at the diner, how he was trying to face the things he had buried for decades. She said he had found an old photo of his brother, my uncle, smiling in a sundress, and had cried for the first time in years. She didn't promise he was ready to accept me, but she said, "He wants to try again, slowly, if you're ready to." I sat on the floor of the shop after reading it, the smell of old books around me, and I cried. Not out of fear or shame, but because for the first time, I felt like maybe my family could be more than pain and secrets. That night, I went home to my uncle's house, lit a candle, and placed the locket, the photo, and the rescued clothes on the table. They were pieces of a life fractured by shame and stitched back together with quiet love. I still don't know if my father will ever truly understand me. I don't know if the wounds in our family will ever fully heal. But I do know this. The punishment that was meant to break me became the beginning of my freedom. And that freedom led me here, to a life where I can exist, where I can breathe, where I can finally look in the mirror and see someone real staring back. They thought it was a punishment, but it was the key to everything. Months passed, and the quiet life with my uncle became a rhythm that felt almost like healing. Morning started with the smell of coffee and the sound of the old clock ticking in the kitchen. I would wrap myself in the blue scarf or the yellow cardigan and watch the sunlight slowly stretch across the living room floor. For the first time in my life, I felt the weight of my own existence settle in a way that wasn't crushing. I was no longer running or hiding, I was just living. I began journaling again, filling page after page with my thoughts, fears, and moments of quiet joy. This time, I wrote openly about who I was, about the feeling of freedom that bloomed every time I wore the clothes that felt like mine, and about the strange mix of grief and hope that followed me everywhere. My uncle would sometimes glance at me while I wrote and smile, like he could see the pieces of me coming back together. One evening, as we were cooking dinner, he said, "I want to show you something." He went to the small hallway closet and pulled out an old, dusty box. Inside were photographs, letters, and even a few old journals, his journals from the years after he left home. I flipped through them slowly, reading the words of a younger version of him who was scared and alone but determined to be free. One line burned itself into my mind. "The day I left, I thought I was breaking. But really I was being born." I looked up at him, and he said softly, "That's what I see in you." Those words stayed with me as I started to take small steps into the world as myself. I visited a thrift store and bought a pair of simple black flats, a soft white blouse, and a flowing skirt. I wore them out for the first time on a quiet afternoon, walking through a park while the wind lifted the fabric gently around my legs. No one stared. No one yelled. I just existed, and it felt like a miracle. Still, the shadow of my family lingered. My mother sent small letters every few weeks, always careful, always hopeful. My sister sent photos of her life at home, sometimes with a short message like, "Miss you," or "Dad's trying." And then, one afternoon, a letter came in my father's handwriting. My hands shook as I opened it. Inside was just one sentence. "I don't understand, but I want to try if you'll let me." My uncle squeezed my shoulder when he saw the tears in my eyes. "It's your choice," he said. I didn't answer right away. I carried that letter with me for days, reading it over and over. I thought about all the pain, the anger, the nights I cried alone. I thought about my uncle standing in the cold years ago, begging for love that never came. And I thought about the fragile hope that maybe my story could end differently. Eventually, I agreed to see him. We met in a quiet park at the edge of town. My heart pounded as I walked up to the bench where he was waiting. He looked older, smaller, like the anger he had carried all those years had finally begun to crumble. When he saw me, he didn't speak at first. His eyes filled with tears. Slowly, he said, "I was wrong. I thought I could force you to be who I wanted. But I see now. I almost lost you the same way I lost my brother." I sat beside him, my hands trembling. "I don't know if I can forgive everything," I said quietly. "You don't have to," he whispered. I want to try." For the first time, he hugged me. It was awkward and hesitant, but it was real. And in that moment, I felt a piece of the chain I had carried my whole life finally fall away. That night, back at my uncle's house, I lit a candle by the window and looked at the photo of myself as a child, spinning in my mother's scarf. I thought about the years of shame, the nights of fear, the secrets that nearly tore us apart. And I thought about the journey that began the moment they tried to punish me for being myself. They thought it was a punishment, but it was the start of my freedom. And in that freedom, I finally found myself.